Just aging is the explanation almost every man past 50 gets handed for a swollen, uncomfortable prostate, and almost none of us ever push back on it. I certainly didn't. I used to stand in front of the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, already exhausted, having been up 3 times in the night, and tell myself the same tired line. "You're 83, what did you expect?" I believed that for the better part of a decade. Then Reese, a retired doctor I'd known for 30 years, sat across from me at a diner, looked at my plate, and said something that turned my whole understanding upside down. "Your prostate isn't reacting to your birthday, it's reacting to your belt size." I laughed. He didn't. I still get my checkups every year, still let my doctor run whatever he wants to run, and I still sit in that waiting room without the dread that used to sit in my chest for days beforehand. That part of my life is calm now. I take my granddaughter fishing most Saturday mornings, sunrise to almost noon, sitting in a low canvas chair on the bank without needing to walk back to the truck every hour. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because 5 years ago, I would have turned the invitation down, quietly, and made up an excuse. But I want to slow down, because if I just say lose weight, you'll roll your eyes and close this video, and you'd be right to, because that's not an explanation, that's a slogan. What I want to give you instead is the actual mechanism nobody sat me down and explained. The real reason just aging was never the true answer for what was happening inside my body. For years, the story I told myself was simple. Men get older, the prostate gets bigger, you deal with it. Wake up 2 or 3 times a night, feel like you never fully empty out, plan every long car ride around gas station bathrooms. I assumed that was biology working exactly as biology is supposed to work, and that there was nothing underneath it worth investigating. My doctor, to be fair to him, had about 8 minutes a visit and a waiting room full of people behind me. He'd check the basics, note that it was common at my age, and move on. I don't fault him for it. That's just the math of a busy practice. But it left me with a swollen, uncomfortable gland and absolutely no picture of what was actually driving it year after year. Here's what I finally learned, and what changed how I saw my own body completely. The prostate isn't an isolated organ sitting off in a corner, immune to everything else going on inside you. It's tissue that responds to signals, hormonal signals, inflammatory signals, metabolic signals, the same way your joints or your arteries respond to what's happening in the rest of your system. And one of the strongest signals feeding prostate growth as men age isn't age itself. It's the extra weight many of us quietly carry around the middle, and the metabolic chaos that weight creates underneath the surface. That reframe mattered to me more than almost anything else in this whole journey. Because just aging is something you can't touch. You can't negotiate with a calendar. But a metabolic pattern that's been quietly feeding my prostate for 20 years, that's something with levers. Real ones. Not a miracle, not a cure. A lever I could actually pull. For years, one number ran my life. The PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night, certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. Here's the mechanism, laid out the way Reese laid it out for me over pie and bad diner coffee. When a man carries extra fat around his belly, what doctors call visceral fat, the kind wrapped around the organs rather than sitting just under the skin, that fat tissue doesn't just sit there quietly. It behaves almost like its own hormone-producing organ. It pumps out inflammatory signals into the bloodstream around the clock. It disrupts the normal balance of hormones circulating through your system. And research looking at large groups of men has found a consistent association between this pattern, what's sometimes called metabolic syndrome, the cluster of extra belly weight, elevated blood sugar, high blood pressure, and unhealthy cholesterol, and a larger prostate with more severe urinary symptoms. Not a coincidence running alongside aging, a driver running underneath it. Once I understood that, my whole just aging story fell apart in the best possible way. Because it meant the swelling and the pressure and the endless nighttime trips weren't a life sentence handed to me by the calendar. They were, at least in real part, downstream of something I actually had some influence over, the metabolic load my body had been carrying for years, mostly through habits I'd never really examined. Reese walked me through it slower than that first diner conversation, over a few more visits, because you could tell I needed the whole picture before I'd trust any of it. He explained that visceral fat doesn't just add inches to a waistline. It changes the hormonal weather inside a man's whole body. It can tilt the balance between testosterone and estrogen in ways that favor prostate tissue growth. It raises circulating insulin, and elevated insulin appears to act almost like a growth signal to tissue that's already sensitive to signals, the prostate among it. Layer enough of that on top of chronic low-grade inflammation year after year, and you get exactly the kind of slow, steady swelling that most men and most rushed appointments simply chalk up to getting older. It isn't one villain. It's several signals, all pointing the same tissue in the same direction for decades, without a single loud symptom to warn you until the bathroom trips started stacking up. I won't pretend it was a simple fix, because it wasn't, and anyone who tells you a switch flips overnight is selling you something. But I stopped thinking about my prostate as a separate, doomed piece of machinery and started thinking about my whole body as one connected system. That shift in thinking is what got me to actually change something, instead of just enduring it the way I had for years. The first thing I addressed was the extra weight sitting around my middle, the visceral kind that had crept on slowly through my 60s and 70s without me ever making a decision to gain it. I didn't attack it with some brutal diet. I simply cut the late-night snacking that had become a habit more than a hunger, and I traded the second and third helpings at dinner for a plate I actually stopped eating from once I was full. Slow, boring, unglamorous. Over about a year, the number on my belt moved down 2 notches. I wasn't chasing a number on a scale. I was chasing less pressure at 3 a.m. The second piece was moving my body daily, not for punishment, but because research following tens of thousands of men over many years has linked regular physical activity to lower rates of prostate enlargement and fewer urinary symptoms. Movement seems to calm the whole inflammatory system down, not just tone a muscle. I started with a 15-minute walk after dinner instead of heading straight for the recliner, and built it up from there, slowly, the way an 83-year-old body actually tolerates change. The third piece was cutting back hard on the fried food, the processed snacks, the sugary drinks that had quietly made up a good portion of my week for decades. That stuff carries its own inflammatory weight, feeding exactly the kind of metabolic chaos that was showing up as pressure and swelling down below. Cutting it back wasn't punishment. It was closing a door that had been feeding a fire I didn't even know was burning. None of these 3 pieces alone would have done much. Together, as a system, sustained over months rather than days, they were what actually moved the needle for me. I've watched other men my age chase exotic powders and complicated regimens shipped from overseas, convinced there had to be some secret ingredient nobody else knew about. What actually worked for me was boring and consistent and connected to the rest of my health instead of separate from it. There was a fourth piece too, smaller but worth naming because Reese insisted on it every time I saw him. Sleep. Not the number of hours exactly, but the quality of it. Going to bed at a consistent time, keeping the room dark and cool, not scrolling on a phone until midnight the way I used to when I couldn't sleep anyway because I'd be up soon regardless. Poor sleep and chronic stress raised the same inflammatory and hormonal signals that visceral fat raises, so cleaning up my sleep wasn't a separate project. It was part of the same system, feeding the same result. I kept a little notebook by the bed, the way Reese told me to, jotting down a few words each morning, how many times I'd been up, how heavy the pressure felt on waking. Comparing my first 2 weeks to week 10, the change wasn't dramatic day to day, but the trend line across the stretch was undeniable. Fewer nights at 3 wake-ups, more nights where 1 or even 0 felt almost normal again. What surprised me most wasn't the physical change, though that mattered plenty. It was how much of my daily life I'd quietly rearranged around a body I'd stopped trying to understand. I'd stopped accepting long car trips with old friends because I didn't trust myself past 40 minutes. I'd stopped sitting through a full movie at the theater, always picking the aisle seat near the exit just in case. I'd built an entire smaller version of my life around managing symptoms instead of addressing what was underneath them. When the pressure started easing month over month, I found myself saying yes to things again without running the calculations first. Those small freedoms don't sound like much until you've lived without them long enough to forget what saying yes without hesitation even felt like. I remember the first time I made it through an entire church service without needing to slip out during the sermon, sitting in the same pew I'd avoided for years because it was too far from the door. I sat there afterward, almost in disbelief, running through the morning in my head, waiting for the old pressure to show up. It didn't. These days, I take my wife on drives out to the coast without mapping out every rest stop along the highway first, and that kind of freedom means more to me at 83 than almost anything else I could name. I want to be honest with you about something, because this channel isn't here to frighten you into anything. An enlarged prostate is not cancer, and having one doesn't mean your risk of the thing you're actually afraid of has gone up. Most of the time, a swollen, uncomfortable prostate is a gland responding to years of metabolic and inflammatory signals, not a sign of the worst news a man can hear. That's not something to panic over. It's something you can actually work on with real levers starting today. But hear me clearly on this part, because I mean it as seriously as anything else in this video. I am not telling you to skip a single appointment. I'm telling you the exact opposite. Keep getting checked every year on schedule with your doctor watching the things he's trained to watch. What I changed was how I supported my own comfort day to day, the metabolic weight my body was carrying. What he watches is a separate, essential job, and both matter enormously. I sat across from my doctor and told him exactly what I'd changed: the walking, the weight, the fried food, and he didn't tell me to stop any of it. He just kept doing his part while I finally started doing mine. Here's what I settled on: a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once: the growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. What I want you to walk away with is this. The swelling and the pressure you've been carrying might feel like a life sentence handed down by your birth certificate, but for a lot of men, it's something else entirely. A metabolic story that's been quietly writing itself for years, one that you actually have some say in. It was never just aging. It was a signal, and signals can be answered. I think about the man I was 5 years ago, turning down a fishing trip because he didn't trust his own body for 4 hours on a riverbank, quietly convinced that this was simply how the rest of his life would go: smaller, more careful, ruled by a bladder instead of by his own choices. And I think about the man I am now, the one who says yes without calculating the risk first, who trusts a whole afternoon to his own body again. That's not a miracle. That's just a body finally being given what it needed to calm down, once someone finally explained what it had actually been reacting to all along. That's dignity, quietly rebuilt one ordinary morning at a time, not handed back to me by a prescription, but earned back through months of boring, unglamorous choices I could actually sustain. If any part of this sounds like your own story, tell me in the comments how long you've carried it, what just aging has cost you, what you've tried, and what actually helped. I read every single one. And if today changed how you see your own prostate even a little, subscribe, because I've got a lot more of what I've learned still to share with you.